All right. Hello, we're back. Welcome to the Armist Inquisition, episode 280 on Sunday, the 14th of May, 2023. I'm Phil.
I'm Ben.
I'm Matt.
And tonight we are delighted to be joined by author, historian, researcher David Elkington. How are you doing, David? Can you hear us?
I'm fine, thank you, guys. How are you guys?
Excellent.
Good.
Yes, we were just talking before we went live about our recent visit to some of the places you reference in the book. The book in question being this one here, The Ancient Language of Sacred Sound, the Acoustic Science of the Divine. What it's a wicked cover, that, David. It's very sacred geometrical.
I have to say, Inner Traditions did a stunning job of it. I have to say, it was. I was really pleased when they showed it to me because I just was overwhelmed. Actually, I thought it was really, really superbly well designed. I have to say, they did a thoroughly good job overall, actually, and a really great company to work for, to be honest with you.
And it's difficult when you're referencing these incredible works of architecture like Chartres Cathedral to be able to do that justice in a book cover in some way, because these buildings are absolutely wild in the way they're put together and the thought that goes into it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, ideally, it would be great to have a great big, expense account and do a big book with lots of really glossy photographs showing, the greater detail of the sites and the effects of them, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, being practical and feasible, it couldn't be done. So much had to be left to the imagination, as it were. Then, of course, if you're in the right mood when reading the book, that's exactly what will happen.
Well, entire books have been written on the subject of charts. You mentioned the Charpentier book in your work.
Yeah, it's a good book, and it's quite revealing in many ways. It's so sad that today history is divided into many separate departments, one might say. You've got, what is labeled tersely by academics as fringe history, and then you've got academic history, and then you've got the history of, Hollywood and so on and so forth. But what I've learned is that there's really a lack of inquiry by a lot of the academic side of it all, because they have to toe a particular line, which I think is down largely to politics and funding. And you're not allowed to ask sort of wider questions beyond the remit, beyond the conditioning, which is why I pursue an independent career, because it gives me the freedom to ask whatever I want. And yeah, some things can be bonkers, but I think they have to be gone into to determine they're bonkers rather than just dismissed. Because you never know what's out there. You never know what's going to make a difference. When the book first came out, there were those who still dismiss it. They say, oh, it's all New Age and all of that. And actually, when you read the book, and when I wrote it, New Age was not in my vocabulary. It's just not that. It's taking a completely different look at the old evidence. And I defy anybody to tell me that the great cathedrals of the Gothic period, the pyramids well before them, temples across the world, were not built for purposes of inducing specific kind of resonances in people's brains. It seems to me to be pretty obvious, and I think it's obvious to a lot of people too.
Yeah, I think as soon as you start mentioning words like frequency and resonance, that is a cudgel that the academic world will beat you over head with, because it's become synonymous with the New Age movement, and we're all vibrations, baby, and good vibes and all that sort of thing.
Yes, quite.
But you reference a lot of sort of harder science like quantum physics and theoretical physics and stuff like that in the book. I didn't get New Age vibes whatsoever. I got some esoteric vibes from it. That some of the stuff you were hinting at sort of suggests like an occulted level of knowledge or esoteric knowledge that's going on there.
Yeah, I think that's very much the case. I'm glad you did get the New Age feel for it, because that would have been very sad. I would have clicked the off button at that point. But no, joking apart, yeah, I mean, this is one of the arguments about a project I'm working on at the moment, which is kind of like an offshoot of resonance. It's to do with a discovery I made about 16 years ago in northern Jordan, and it's about the earliest known Christian documents, which have come in the form of metal or lead books. Talking with Christians, etc., they are very, particularly in the academic world, very quick to dismiss the whole esoteric idea of history and theology. But as a scholar friend of mine said, if Christianity isn't esoteric, then what is it? And the reason I bring up Christianity, of course, it was at the center of the Gothic cathedrals. Right. And what we have here, when we look at the various elements that came to constructing the cathedrals, what we have here is a secret initiation, if you like, within the Christian priesthood that set Europe on the path to fundamental change. And I say secret because the average education of people in Europe in the Middle Age period was much less than our own, and you have these extraordinary places that St. Bernard of Clairvaux described as books in stone, and literally that is what they are. You open the great doors, which are like the pages of a book. It's like the cover of a book. They're set on great hinges, and you open them, and then you enter into this four-dimensional world, which must have been absolutely fantastic to these people, because here they were, your average peasant working in the fields, etc., had to go to church on Sunday, and so they put on their best bib and tucker for a Sunday service, and they walk into a Gothic cathedral newly opened, all fresh and bright, and hey presto, bang, they're really clobbered by the light, the intensity of the sound, the resonance, the extraordinary stained glass windows with their wonderful pigments. And, they must have been really hit by that. And so, in a sense, these places are like, I guess they're the microchips of their day. They're sharing their information by inducing it to appear within the brain, as it were, to then get people to become more curious. It provokes that kind of a sensation, and I say that on the basis of a personal experience I had at Wells Cathedral many years ago, where it was at Christmas time. I'd just come out of a relationship, and it was very sad. And I walked up the stairs to the chapter house. Now, if you ever get the chance to go to Wells Cathedral, not far from Glastonbury, go into the chapter house, because you have to go up these really time-worn steps to get into it. And it was about halfway up those steps that I was suddenly hit by the very majestic sound of a choir in practice for the Christmas concert. And I felt myself completely transported. I thought as if afterwards it was like a near-death experience. It's the only way I can describe it. And I came out of that completely stunned. And that's what set me on the track for the book. That's why I wanted to find out what had happened, why had it happened, and of course that then led to the question of why did they build this place, and yeah, it's been quite a journey.
David, do you think we've kind of lost that skill set? Because I know as Christians, we're not really building those grand churches anymore, but I know that there are a lot of, there's a new mosque near us, which is it looks fantastic. I don't know if the kind of acoustics around a large scale monument such as that is going to be taken into account by the other religions as well. And all I really know is that our new churches, from a Christian point of view, tend to just be kind of boxes and not really.
Yeah,
really
it's really sad. We've lost all of that knowledge. Well, I say lost. We haven't really lost it. It's there, hence the reason I've written my book. The problem is it's not being applied, because it's seen now as being largely, as you just said, esoteric. But the priesthood, the people who are designing these churches, they have no regard for such things. We're now progressive. We're modern. We can do without all of that nonsense. But of course, that nonsense is basically what the building was for in the first place. It's very, very sad.
Well, one thing we did lose, David, which you point out in the book, is the technology behind the stained glass in medieval cathedrals.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing, the whole technology of the cathedrals together in the medieval period is what I termed in the book spiritual technology. It was there to bring in this overall effect of, dare I say, enlightenment? Because if you look at the cathedrals before the Gothic, we're looking at the Romanesque period. Beautiful places, but they've got very thick walls. They're founded on the round arch, so you can only, in terms of the superstructure, have small windows because you've got to, to build them big, you've got to therefore have very thick walls, and you've got to have small windows because otherwise the places would just fall apart. And then suddenly, after the Crusades, we have the introduction into Western Europe of elements of Islamic architecture, which is fundamentally where the beginnings of the Gothic come from. And we then have Abbe Suger at Saint-Denis actually deriving from the Islamic code this new technique, which becomes known as the Gothic. As soon as Saint-Denis goes up, suddenly there's this kind of a touch paper has been lit, and it burns like a raging inspirational fire throughout the whole of Europe. Next thing you know, you've got the Gothic arches. Now, the Gothic arch is pointed, and the arch, along with the ogive, which you'll see in the center of the nave of the Gothic cathedral, allows more weight to be distributed. So therefore, you can create much larger windows. So the Gothic cathedrals suddenly go from being dark spaces to being completely light-filled spaces. They are kind of like giant crystals, because glass is a crystal. The light coming through it is astonishingly pure. And so in a sense, you have enlightenment. People are going into these places for the first time and they're completely stunned and taken aback. And that's why Christianity maintained its foothold within Europe for such a long time. It's the sheer effect of these places, and we haven't looked at this as deeply as we should do. My book is a beginning, but it's only a beginning.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to ask you about, which it'd be good for people to hear about, is early on you start mentioning the Schumann frequency, which I was aware of, and this seems to be like one of the main starting points for you, which then gets developed through the book. So tell us about the Schumann frequency and what it does.
Well, basically what you're looking at is earth resonance. The earth actually resonates at around about 32 hertz, or vibrations per second. So we're back to our good vibrations. So hello, New Age, here we are. But the earth is actually hit like a bell by incoming cosmic waves from outer space. So in response to those cosmic waves, it resonates to a particular standard frequency, 32 hertz. Now, an octave of that is 8 hertz, which is approximately what the brain actually resonates at during the day. So we are therefore connected to our planet. But this alpha frequency is something you go into at least twice a day when you go into or come out of sleep. Okay? Now, the effect of Earth frequency, particularly the alpha frequency, is to basically widen your sense of consciousness. So it's like sort of taking a puddle of water, then taking a drop of oil and dropping it onto the surface. Suddenly it just goes boom, it reaches outwards. That's exactly what happens with the brain and alpha frequencies. So that's why they say, if you have a problem, you should sleep on it. And this is basically what these places were built to provoke, to give us a sense of a wider sense of consciousness, a sense of connections between things. Except, of course, that in a sense, it wasn't just the wideness of God's kingdom and all of that, because that's what would have been preached at the time. It then extended into life in general, to science in general. And that's what, changed Europe. That's what led to the Renaissance. That's what led to the Enlightenment. That's what led to the scientific sense of curiosity that has now developed our world into what it is. And, we now have a world in crisis. We've got environmental problems here, there, and everywhere else. And yet nowhere have I seen mentioned at all the idea of looking at resonances as an answer to some of those problems, if not all of them. Again, it's kind of dismissed because, it's not the accepted science of the day. And it seems to me to be very sad, because half the reason we're in this problem is because we've separated ourselves so much from creation, from the earth around us. For too long now, we thought of ourselves as being superior, whereas in fact, we're neither above nature nor below it. We are part of it. And we need to start thinking more in those terms, it seems to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, going back to frequency and resonance. So you mentioned that the cathedral builders were trying to harness the sort of natural frequencies like the Schumann frequency. So what did you find? How did you find that these frequencies were incorporated in different types of architecture?
Well, it's really curious, if you look at cathedral naves and you look at the way in which they're constructed, quite often you can see that actually they're built to what is called a standing waveform. Now, you'd say to me, well, how would they have known that? Well, I'm not saying they objectively knew it, but I'm saying that they subjectively understood it. It seems to me that almost that, in coming out of the cave environment, coming out of the trees and becoming human, becoming societal humans, the very first thing we know from archaeology that we built in, constructing the societal environment wasn't shops, wasn't schools, it wasn't even our own homes. It was always the sacred place. And it struck me as to why. What's the answer to this question? Now, in quoting a paper from Princeton University about some experiments performed in the early 90s, where the resonant frequencies actually took visual form when smoke was introduced, we could see that they were linked to Earth frequency. And of course, I talk about this in detail in the book.
Was that the experiment at West Kennet Long Barrow?
Yes, West Kennet, Newgrange in Ireland, Nath, and then I took it on to do other experiments across the UK and parts of the world, and came up with even more conclusions. But going back to this, what's interesting is that it seems to me that as we came out of the cave environment, we took with us still the umbilicus. It had not been cut, so we were still children. We were still babes in arms. So we've retained that naturally within ourselves. We've retained this sense of connection. So of course it was a kind of like, the sacred place has become a place like where we have to maintain the connection. It's kind of like the telephone that keeps us in touch with Mother Earth, as it were. And of course, this is what's become very much a part of ritual throughout Christian and religious history per se, is a sense this need to go to the place of power. And this is at the heart of poetry, this is at the heart of inspiration, all the way across the planet, all the way through human history.
And you talk about how the religious class, whether that be in Egypt or in Bronze Age Britain or wherever they would be, I don't know where you're going. Oh, you're not going to Lou, David. We can't see you. Does the dog want walking? Does the dog after a walk?
Yeah, I've had to let my dog out. Aww. So yeah, she's a young spaniel. She's a lovely thing.
A King Charles. Now, is there a reason behind that? Are you a fan of Charles II by any chance?
Well, I actually call her a Cavalier King Charles III, if you know, it's really nice, particularly with the coronation having just gone. So, no, she's a beautiful thing, but she's only 6 months old, so you can imagine it's like having a young child around, Yeah, she makes me laugh. I love that, And again, animals, the way we treat them, today is, I just still find it really awful that we still can't give them credit for being conscious living beings. We have to be so superior in everything. It makes me angry.
Do you think part of that comes from Christianity in the Old Testament? What was the line from Genesis? Was it replenish and subdue the earth or something like that?
That's right. Dominion absolutely. It's a massive part of the Judeo-Christian heritage. Right. The earth was given to us by God to shepherd, but of course we understood it to do with as we like, and look what's happened. But other religions are equally as guilty in that sense. I mean, we only have to look at animal sacrifice through the years to see precisely what we've achieved. And it just seems to me that the whole idea that in modern Western science we only just realized that animals, dogs, cats, birds, that they can actually think, that they have consciousness, that in fact they can see in color. It's kind of like, in a sense, I think in years to come, it'll be the new racism.
Do you think dogs might be psychic as well? Are you familiar with that Rupert Sheldrake book?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Rupert Sheldrake's spot on there. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't have had the Egyptians, treating them with the great reverence they did. In Egyptian culture, if you stroked a cat, it would induce well, in fact, it still does. I mean, they have animals in hospital wards because they can induce an instant alpha wave effect, thus calming you down, de-stressing you. Right. In Egypt, therefore, that was known as being in contact with heaven. So that tells you that these people knew. It's just that they explained it in a different language to the way we do today.
My cat threw up on the stairs today. That induced a different emotion, I can tell you.
Yes, say no more. But this is what's so extraordinary is that I kind of wonder sometimes if we live in a mind state universe, that we've kind of dreamed it all up, and that actually the reality, the super reality beyond all of this is much more, in a sense, mundane, but in that super real sense, a bit like being stuck in the Matrix. And that's an interesting word as well, by the way, because Matrix is a feminine. And you'd think that with Judeo-Christianity and all of that, it's all based upon a patriarchal system where the feminine is not given enough credit. And therefore, we'd be living in a matrix, but there's no such word in the English dictionary.
Wow.
So why do we call it a matrix? I find that really annoying. It's another downer on ladies,
Yeah, they get a rough time in the Bible, don't they, the old ladies?
They do. They've been excised an awful lot, and yet if you go to the cathedrals, it's fairly obvious that they're feminine inspired. This is made very clear by St. Bernard and by others who were behind the founding of these places. And of course, you only have to go outside of Christianity and the sacred buildings of Egypt, let's say, or Borobudur, Cambodia, in Thailand, and temples all over the world. They're mostly feminine places. They are not masculine at all.
It's funny you mentioned Bernard of Clairvaux, because I got excited the first time you mentioned him. He was involved in setting up the Knights Templar, wasn't he?
He was indeed. He wrote the code of the order, and he was very intimate with them. So definitely something going on there. But of course, the Templars have been massively done and overdone in the past 20 years through various theories and things. And of course, academic historians don't like even the mention of the word Templar these days. But I'm afraid to say that there's an awful lot more yet to come out. And I think that they were very remarkable. And I do think that those at the top of the order, those who were educated, who could read and write, and who had been to the Middle East, had seen that world, they must have emerged from within it. They must have returned to this country, to Western Europe, and thought, this is not what we were expecting, because their idea of being taught about, Jesus and the Christians, etc., by the church, it must have been a real shock to them to go to the actual place where it all happened and realize that, the environment within which they learnt this faith was completely different from what they were taught. It must have been a huge shock. So to go back to the Middle East and then to come across other forms of Christianity must have really hit them hard. And of course, in returning to the West, such an awful lot changed. It's quite interesting that within 200 or 300 years, you have the rise of the Protestant Church and so on and so forth. So yes, very interesting indeed. Fascinating people.
Yeah, it's a wormhole and a half, the Knights Templar. Dan Jones did a book fairly recently, 2 or 3 years ago, I think, but it was quite mainstream, quite dry history of the Templars book for someone who just wants to dip the feet. But like you said, there are so many books on the sort of more esoteric angles of the Templars and their origins and whatnot. And I feel like we're sort of speculating far more than I'm sort of comfortable with, although it is fascinating.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of speculation to be made about them, but I'm speaking from the viewpoint of having done an awful lot of research on them recently, because they're actually, to a certain extent, they're involved in the discovery that I've made recently, and I'll be announcing those findings in time to come. But they're fascinating in many ways, because they preserved an awful lot that in the West was dismissed later on as heretical, and yet without that heresy we would never have had the rise of science, for instance, in the West, because these people contributed so much that was different, and it helped really to lever us away from the hegemony of the church at the time. So we have an awful lot to be grateful for to them, and to others too. Later on, when we have the example of Galileo and others who were punished for basically discovering and finding the truth. Again, it's human history. We kind of take 2 steps forward. We make one juddering step back, because we're forced to adhere to the current orthodoxies that keep us nailed to the spot, and it's sad, because, as I said earlier on, there's so much out there that we need to investigate, and yet we are kind of hemmed in by the modern scientific idea of logic. Yet, in words of the late Spike Milligan, his great ambition was to rise beyond logic. And I love that because, in a sense, we're using logic in modern society to limit our experience of the world, not to expand it. And I think that's terribly sad. And the word experience in its original Latin is expirare, which basically means from out of the spirit. You see? Yeah. So it's all to do with consciousness. The very words we use are an archaeology of the past and what these people meant when they invented these wonderful places and the sense that they perceived within them. So that's why I say in my book, always have a dictionary with you, always read the full entry of the word concerned and look at its origin, because you'll find it all goes back to the idea of the spirit of consciousness itself. And that's very, very important, because these places were places that helped to expand your consciousness and in fact brought out within the brain the extraordinary gift of script with which we are able to write down what we think. Because as I state in the book, the overall aim of building these places was to provoke consciousness into actually expanding to such a degree that we would find out more and become more knowledgeable. And of course, in the myth of the hero, we've got this extraordinary character whose myth is very similar worldwide, who is the arbiter between us and between heaven. And he draws down the secrets, the sacred secrets, which of course allow us to build these extraordinary places.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things I found really interesting in your book was these labyrinths in the cathedrals. I was completely unaware of these, and I threw up a picture just in the intro video of the labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral. So what do you think was going on? How do you think they were used?
Again, it's a part of procession. The cathedrals are not unique in that. You only have to look at the Hijra in Islam. Every year, everybody who is Islamic in faith has to go to Mecca if they can, and they have to walk the spiral, the ever-decreasing circle around the Kaaba before reaching that point. Now, you do the same with the labyrinth at Chartres. You do the same at Patrick in Western Ireland, the great hill of St. Patrick. To go directly to these places is to get there. But by getting there, you're not getting there. You're not getting there in the right state. You're not getting there in the right sense of emotions. And therefore, you're not setting yourself up for a meeting with the divine. By walking the spiral, you are inducing within the brain a change of consciousness. By doing it slowly, by doing it rhythmically, you are more or less putting yourself into a trance-like state in which you become receptive.
And there would have been singing going on, I presume, at some sort of sacred
Absolutely, they've been singing
frequency.
and chanting again, because again that induces proper brainwave rhythms to be inculcated within the human body. But again, an interesting connection here is that the Jews have a mystical Judaism called Kabbalah. Kabbalah means to receive. So in other words, by getting themselves into a mystical state of mind, you are ready to receive, to receive what? To receive knowledge, to receive enlightenment. And that's what the whole idea of walking the labyrinth was about. I recommend to anybody listening to this show, if you get the chance, walk it, do it. See what you think, see what comes up, see how you feel. It's actually a very, very good thing to do. And it's profoundly good both for your mentality, your emotionality, as well as for your physicality.
Yeah, I suppose, in recent times, some sectors have started to explore ways of sort of centering ourselves in this way. Meditation's become very fashionable over the last couple of decades, for example. We're getting more sort of influence from the Eastern mysticism, if you like.
I don't know. The thing I was thinking of is sort of neurofeedback. I don't know if you've heard of that. Where Yeah, you kind of, you put the electrodes on your head and you kind of train yourself to get into a certain wavelength, essentially. And that was in a book I was reading about complex trauma, believe it or not, and being able to treat people so they could get into that relaxed state instead of being in a constant state of anxiety.
Is that the
essentially.
alpha state?
Yeah, I think so. But I think you could do it so you could train yourself to go into different kinds of states with your way. I'm not an expert on it at all.
It's profoundly interesting stuff, and it's very necessary for us to be at one at least once or twice a day, if possible. As I said, going into and coming out of proper sleep induces an alpha pattern. You have to go through that pattern because as your brain wakes up or as it shuts down to go into sleep, you have to go through that passage called the alpha wave frequency. And you can do that. I do it regularly when I'm out in the country. There are places where you can feel the power of place. You can feel it rising up through the spine. You just have to be open to it, and opening yourself to it is just very easy. You just stand and just let go. I understand how difficult it can be for people because I've been living in London now for a while, waiting for my current project to be finalized. And I found that living in London is genuinely stressful. Everybody's in a rush to go somewhere, and you get sucked into it very, very quickly and easily. And I have to therefore occasionally run screaming to the countryside just to kind of get a breath of air and to see and witness and feel the power of place, which is why I'm deeply envious of you chaps having been down at Glastonbury recently, because disregarding all of the different theories and the people down there and with their different ideas and beliefs, there's definitely something we're all united on, and that is that it's a very, very powerful place. Being there is a very pleasant experience, particularly at this time of the year with all the blossom out and the trees suddenly going green. It's remarkably beautiful, and that aids the countryside. It aids your sense of the power of place, because the blossom, the trees opening up, is a sign of that power because they have themselves imbibed it. And it's terribly important because it shows us that we are a part of the earth. From the earth we come, back to the earth we go. And I think that's a terribly important thing for us to bear in mind. Just got to let go.
Do you think we're hampered in the modern era by all the sort of electronic stuff going around in our lives, whether it's mobile phones or Wi-Fi or different frequencies? Do you think these interact in any way with what's going on with us in our brain or the Schumann frequency or whatever?
Definitely, yeah. There's no two ways about it. Apparently, according to, now I can't think offhand who it was, but it's in the book again. One of the great institutions in the West stated that all of the frequencies that we've got now, of course, we have 5G on top of 4G, and you've got satellite technology, we've got electricity pylons and this, that, and everything else. Apparently, if you looked at the internal workings of a golf ball, which is just elastic bands wound around each other, that more or less is the Earth surrounded by frequencies of electromagnetic radiation, profoundly unhealthy stuff. It's less the case in country, rural areas, but the more you go nearer city centres, the more intense it becomes. So I feel very much different staying in London. I feel very much awake all the time. And I find that when I do sleep properly, I sleep the sleep of exhaustion rather than the sleep that kind of restores you in a sense. And I have to say, I can't wait to get out of here, because I think that, I use the tube every day. So that's another piece of electricity. I take a telephone with me because I have to be on call for the job. That's more electricity, and so on and so forth. I can't wait to get back to rurality and to actually throw my telephone out of the train window and say, Thank God for that.
You talk quite a lot about the crystalline nature of planet Earth and us and everything around us in the book. I was wondering if there is any way of enhancing crystal technology to insulate us from all the RFs that are flying around our brains.
Well, I think that's another thing that needs to be taken seriously too. I mean, you could do a simple experiment actually in late winter, coming on to early spring. Just plant a daffodil bulb in a pot, and then if you then place it below, but between a window, and on one side, and on the other side, a large quartz crystal, you will find that when eventually the daffodil bulb emerges, it will grow towards the quartz crystal and not towards the light of the window.
Wow.
So that tells you an awful lot about the power of crystals and what they can do to alleviate certain electromagnetic stresses.
Cool. Might try that.
Yeah, I'm definitely trying that next year.
Where are we getting
Well,
our quartz from?
Don't forget, you yourselves are, you have liquid crystal running through your veins.
Oh,
Blood.
tell us about that.
Yeah, blood crystallizes when you cut yourself. So it's liquid crystal, literally. And blood contains other crystalline forms like salt and magnesium and things like that, and iron. All of these things crystallize upon emergence into the, shall I say, the real world, when they're oxidated, So we have a tendency to think of water as being non-crystalline, but again, freeze it, and what happens? It turns into a crystal. Interestingly enough, glass too is a liquid crystal. That is its classification. So if you go to an old cathedral like Chartres, and if you take a section of window from one of the stained glass windows, during the restoration, somebody was taking out the parts of the stained glass window, and they took a side-on photograph of it and found that it had actually begun to sink towards the earth. So it was more bulbous at the bottom than it was at the top. So in another, 6,000-7,000 years, if Chartres still standing, the windows would have kind of like almost melted, like ice in the sunshine, because they'll be sagging from the windows. It's very funny, but there we go.
It's mad. Yeah, I've got one crystal here that I got from Avebury. Can't remember what kind it is. Another thing that he brought up in a similar vein in the book, which I'd never heard of, was magnetite and the role that plays.
Yeah, did you understand the pun you just made there? You said in a similar vein.
Good catch.
It's in our language, isn't it? So just a good example there. But yeah, I mean that's another thing. I mean, I have this theory which I think I put it in the appendix at the back of the book. I'm going to write an academic paper on it at some stage or other when I've got the time. It's to do with mummification, because we get our sense of direction through a piece of magnetite that is basically located near the pineal gland, at the top of the nose, about sort of half an inch inwards. And that kind of gives you a sense of where you're at and what direction you're going in, et cetera, et cetera. That's what, other animals have as well. But as we get older, it crystallizes, it hardens, it becomes much more solid, as it were. Now, my idea is this, that working as an Egyptologist many years ago, it was noticeable that if you look at mummies, they are obviously very wrapped and they're very embalmed, but they're laid down horizontally in their coffins because that was part of the ritual of the dead. So therefore, it made no sense to me that the nasal passage was pierced so that they could pull out the brain during the embalming. Because if you go to 18th century, 17th century churches in London, where people during the plague were entombed in lead coffins, you'll find that the body itself, being horizontal when found, was not actually penetrated by the brain as it had rotted down. Because what had happened is, as it had degraded, it's just become like a syrupy liquor that sort of hangs at the base of the cranium. Okay. Now, I know this because I've seen a spoonful of brains, at one of these things many years ago, because they were clearing out the crypts of these places for the building of coffee shops and things like that. So when next time you have a cup of coffee, by the way, do think of decomposed brains.
I'll ask for a teaspoon of brain in my, my latte. Yeah.
One lump or
Why
two.
not? You know? So I think that actually the brain removal in ancient Egyptian ritual became necessary because they actually took a spike and pierced the upper cavity of the nose to actually remove the magnetite. I think the Egyptians knew it was there. I can't tell you how or why, we've no references to that, but it's fairly obvious that they did, because that would have been shifted. And in the shifting, that would have, according to their rituals, have actually released the spirit from its earthbound state. And if you look at the false doors in Egyptian tombs and things like that, the spirit has to move through them in order to ascend to the heavens. And I think that was an essential part of Egyptian ritual. And if you go to the Cairo Museum, and you can see all of the various ritual knives and things used during the process of mummification, and one of them is the spike that pierces the brain. So fascinating stuff. May even have it done myself when the day comes.
We've hardly talked about Egypt, and
you can call me Spike from now
on. One of the things that interests me in the book is you mentioned that it's a bit of a misconception that we think of Egypt as being polytheistic.
Yeah, no, it never was. This is something else that I find annoying. The Egyptians themselves make it very clear throughout their documentation that they believed in the one. But sensibly and logically, they saw the one as being such a vast concept that to encapsulate it in a three-letter word, i.e., God, was absurd. So therefore, they presented the one, or God as we now call it, in the forms of the gods, which were not really gods as such. If you look at the Egyptian word, it's natur, and natur more or less translates as accurately as we can in modern terms as principle, i.e., principle of nature. And the word nature comes directly from the Egyptian natur, by the way. So in a sense, the gods were like the eyes on a peacock's tail. You know, we all think the eyes are wonderful, but it's only when you sort of take a step back that you see the overall peacock. And that was the same principle with the Egyptians. It's a part of the, dare I say, the appalling progressive nature and actually xenophobic racism of historical studies that we must see the ancient peoples as being simplistic,
Primitive,
ill-educated, ill-informed, because it makes us look better. But really, when you stand back and you look at their achievements, for all of our technology, for all of our computer, this and computer that, we still don't know how the pyramids were built. This is extraordinary. We've got to start giving these people the credit that they were due. Egyptian civilization lasted longer by a long shot than any other civilization. I mean, 5,000 years? That's astonishing. How long did the Roman Empire last? It barely made it to 800 years. British Empire, 200 or 300 years. But, an empire that goes over, well, I say an empire, but a civilization that goes for over, 1,000 years or so, that's quite remarkable. And I just think hats off to the Egyptians. I find them profound. We if you go back to Tudor or even Stuart England, under James and Charles, etc., people thought that having bards was a bad thing. So of course, if you took a time machine back to 1600s London, you'd have to have carried nose pegs with you because people stunk to high heaven. The streets were open sewers, with the result that come 1858, you ended up with what was called the Great Stink, because the Thames was nothing more than one vast open sewer to the biggest city then on the planet. And of course, that then led to a massive cholera outbreak. And then finally, having reached crisis yet again, we had to do something about it. And of course, Joseph Bazalgette came along and invented the sewer system. Now go back 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years. The Egyptians had all of that. They knew about personal cleanliness. They bathed regularly. When they were at supper, they generally, the higher classes in Egypt, they wore wigs. They shaved their heads, but wore wigs for special occasions. When at supper, they had great cones of incense that would melt over them. The incense contained natural disinfectants that would help to feed the skin, but also to cleanse it. They knew about personal cleanliness. They knew about proper sewerage systems and all of that. And this was a hell of a long time ago. So if you look at the cathedrals and compare them to today's architecture, and then you go back to the pyramids, we're like a graph. The line goes up and it goes down and it goes up. And unfortunately, chaps, I've got bad news for you. I think we're in a trough at the moment.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah. It's one of the things that annoys me about the whole ancient aliens thing. It kind of, I feel like it robs our ancestors of the respect and the reverence they deserve, and the obvious ingenuity that they had.
Totally agree with you. It's what I call the American comic strip theory. Earth's in a real state. It's in a bloody mess. Somebody from outside is going to come and help us. Well, if I was an alien in a passing spaceship, I'd think, oh no, I'm not going to go there. Move on. I mean, it comes from within us, and I suspect that actually, on a more esoteric level, I suspect that UFOs are actually not unidentified flying objects, but rather unidentified flying subjects. I think they come from within, and I personally believe that when we look up into the cosmos at night, I think that what we're seeing is a perfect reflection of our own deep unconscious. Because to my mind, our existence is marked by that level in a bottle where, imagine a bottle half full, okay? The line of the water demarcates the empty space above it, but the full space below. I think we're the line on the bottle. I think that the full space below is the conscious, and the empty space above is the unconscious. And I say this because, again, I put it in the book. I'm dyslexic. I come from an Irish background, so I've been born with a Celtic state of mind. So I can see things differently, which leads to a big sense of humor, by the way. I bless the Irish for that. But if you look at the word alien, it's actually been misspelt. It's actually L-I-N. Now, L-I-N is the 16th letter of the Hebrew, Egyptian, and Greek alphabets. And it is actually symbolized by the pineal gland.
Yep. That's two. It's E-L-A-Y-I-N. Is that right?
That's it, exactly. And if you rub the pineal gland, if you can actually stimulate it, you will end up with what I call DMT visions, where these beings will come to you, and then you will see that we are not alone. We like to think that we are, but again, the real rescue of the world will come through inspiration by speaking to these beings that are deep inside us. I'm convinced of that, and I think that basically is what genuine spirituality really is.
Wow, that's cool.
That is cool.
What about sort of crowd? Because you mentioned the Zaytun. Is it Zaytun sightings in Egypt?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the mass consciousness idea when visions come along. again, I think it's like a collective thing that drives frequency down. Again, it's not been looked at because, to be fair to scientists, these things happen so rarely, it's difficult to actually get any empirical data from them. But
Yeah.
again, we've got photographs of this vision of Mary appearing above the Coptic church at Zaytun. And again, I suspect that that's a part of the subjective alien thing, or LIN thing, if we're to be more specific, wherein Mother Earth is trying actually to speak to us, but this time in very literal terms, because Mary, of course, is associated with Mother Earth in the Christian legends, and that's what's so fascinating. Where we're seeing Christianity as being genuine, and to a degree it is, but there's aspects of it that it shares with many other religions, but I won't go too heavily into that because that's going to be my next book, and I've got
Cool.
some real corkers to reveal about within that.
Yeah, those Zaytun phenomena are interesting. It was like it went on for years in the late 60s. I think it was over
Yeah.
about 3-year period, and tens
That's
of
right.
thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are looking at this vision of the Virgin Mary above this church. It's wild. You can see the photographs. It's
Well, again, it's interesting. We say it's the Virgin Mary. Well,
Well-
in other faiths, of course, it would be, in Islam, it would be Fatima and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But if you look at the idea of angels, in the medieval period and backwards, people saw angels because, of course, they associated with the divine presence and Christianity and so on and so forth. Today, in a much more technological world, we see aliens. But
Yes.
is there a difference between the two?
Yeah, it's all about cultural context at the end of the day, isn't it?
It is indeed,
Yeah.
and that's what I find so interesting. I love Spielberg's film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I love the journey that Roy Neary, played by Richard Dreyfuss, is on, and of course, finally he gets to enter the alien craft, and off he goes. You've got that wonderful music by John Williams. But I often think to myself, you could do a comedy about this, couldn't you? He could be a Christian who sees it, the UFO in Christian terms, and then suddenly, halfway through the journey, he decides to become a Muslim, and suddenly the whole thing changes, or he becomes a pagan, and somehow, the background scenery changes, and it all keeps changing because he keeps changing his mind, because that essentially is who we are. We're in a world of experience. We're trying to find out who we are, where we're at, why we're here, and yet it's also terribly subjective.
David, do you think that God is created in man's own image then, to flip the vernacular?
Why don't we change the vocabulary and say that God is downloaded in man's own image?
Excellent.
I suspect that's probably very much the case, because again, you only have to go online and look at go to YouTube and look at the size of the universe. You'll see some of these animations,
Yes. Yeah.
and they go from the very smallest particle to the very size of the universe, and it's just staggering. And yet we encapsulate the whole thing in a word called God.
Yeah.
It seems bizarre to me that the name of God is so short. It should actually be the size of one of those Welsh railway stations.
I think it might be a coping mechanism because it's difficult to comprehend, isn't it? Similarly, on the internet, there's that timeline of the far future that's similar to the small to big thing, and it just goes through what we expect to happen through all the heat death of the universe in many, many millions and trillions of years in the future, and it's just absolutely mind-boggling. I love it, but I can't comprehend it.
The problem is, as we all know now because of our history, is that by encapsulating God in such a short word, it's led to so much wickedness, so much misinterpretation, so much bloodshed, and we should be a bit more honest. I think we should actually start to look at the idea of God as consciousness, and that we ascend through stages to a higher consciousness ourselves, wherein perhaps we get a glimpse of the divine. But the whole idea of carrying around this noxious thing called God in our pockets, because you can turn and say, well, my God's better than your God. Well, why bother fighting when it's supposed to be the same thing?
It removes responsibility as well. I mean, you can say, well,
Totally.
God made me do it, or I've done it in God's name. And that's, we know wars are fought and lost, and all kinds of
Yeah.
bad decisions are made in the name of God.
I got beaten as a child at school in Australia. I was only about 7 years of age because I blasphemed unwittingly. And I got hauled before the class when I was daydreaming. I was caught daydreaming out, looking out of the window, because those were the days when, youngsters, when we were at school, the days were so long. And now I'm a hell of a lot older. The days are going so quickly. But I got dragged up in front of the class by this teacher who was a very deeply religious man. And he said, "You will now tell the class what you were daydreaming about." And I said, "Well, sir, I think I've discovered the identity of God." And he was most impressed. He kind of let go of the hairs on the back of my neck and said, "Well, please tell me." And I said, "God, sir, is a dachshund." And he gave me the most astonishingly awful look. And he said, "How the hell did you come to that conclusion?" I said, "It was terribly simple, sir. If you put God and Jesus together and spell them backwards, you end up with sausage dog."
I can't fault that logic.
I got severely beaten for that, but I have to say that's where my idea of playing with words comes, because I mean, being dyslexic, you see things the other way around. I'm able to read, Hebrew and other languages with a certain amount of ease. I'm not an expert at Hebrew, I have to say, but I do find it easier to read than I do English because it's right to left rather than left to right.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting aspect, that there is no dyslexia in those languages.
That's something I particularly enjoyed, was the etymology and the wordplay in the book. That was very different for me.
Yeah. Well, again, it's the archaeology of words and their meaning. Yeah. We take words so much for granted. We don't actually, a lot of us, look at them and see what they really mean. I once met an atheist at a debate, and he described his atheism as enthusiastic. And that's where I got him, because, of course, enthusiastic in Latin is entheos, which means in God. Yes, you can catch people out with words, and of course, if you can understand words, then you can use them properly. But as Confucius says, when words lose their meaning, people lose their freedom, and never was that more true than today.
Absolutely.
Well said. Well, David, on that note, I think we've gone over an hour, and you look as though you're about to disappear into the ether.
Oh God,
yourself.
that's the light. Sorry, I forgot to put the ruddy light on. Yes, I do apologise.
It don't matter.
Do I look sort of sinister enough?
Absolutely, certainly, yeah. It's good. It's a good ambience. It's definitely.
Yeah.
You could just do a torch under your jaw, Just.
I was just thinking of that. Actually, let's just give it a go. I've got one here on my phone.
Oh wow!
Perfect. That's amazing.
Yes, I like it. That's great. Yeah.
Well, this has been fabulous, David. I had a page full of notes of things to ask you, and I haven't looked at it yet.
No,
but we've gone over an hour already, so we're gonna have to do this again sometime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, just let's do something. Just let me know when, and be happy to ramble on. I always call it a history of Babylon, because you get to sit there and listen, and I get to babble on and on and on.
That's great.
That was fantastic. Right, we'll sign off unless there's any final message you need to tell people. I mean, the link will be in the show notes if people want to buy the book. But is there anything else you need to tell us about, or a website? I couldn't find a website or anything for you.
No, I will be sorting that out in the months to come. But as I said, I'm keeping a low profile on that at the moment because of various things that have been happening with the current project, which you'll get to hear about. But yeah, I mean, I just hope that everybody does enjoy the book. I hope it gives you all a sense of the profound meaning of not just the power of a place, but the power of language itself. And the reason I say that is we're living in a world now where freedom of speech is under pressure as never before. And if we allow certain fundamentalists to break down freedom of speech and to take it away from us, like the censoring of books and all of that. And I think that the more people know about these things, the more that we can read, the more that we've got the art of protesting about it.
Yeah, well said. Right. Stay on the line, David, for us for 1 minute while we play ourselves out. And for those of you in podcast land, we'll be back in 5 or 10 minutes for part 2 to do some news, some fun stuff. Got a packed part 2. Woo. Right, okay. Sayonara. Take care.
Bye.